But I'm joined now by Dale Vince, founder of Ecotricity and a Labour supporter. Dale, thank you very much for joining me. I think this is a really important speech by Claire Coutinho saying that we can't move before the technology is ready and that we only make 1% of the emissions anyway, and we've done our share of the heavy lifting.
Well, you know, I thought it was big on rhetoric, light on fact, actually. The idea that the technology is not here for a starter is untrue. All of the technology we need for the green transition is with us now. The idea that it will cost us more to implement it is not true. It's cheaper to go green than not. The OBR told us that a few months ago. You'll have probably read their report. It'll cost twice as much to stick with fossil fuels as it will to transition to green energy. And the idea that we have central planning and prices dictated by the government is also untrue.
Well, as you know perfectly well, green energy is more expensive because currently it has to have hydrocarbon energy on standby, and that means you have the capital cost of the carbon fuels to be ready, and you have to have the extra cost of starting up and running down the power station run on gas, which is much more expensive. There's huge costs created by green energy.
Well, I dispute the conclusion that because of that, green energy is more expensive than fossil fuels.
So where do you attribute the cost of that then?
The cost is in the grid. It's real. It's not as big as it's made out to be, but it does not make the cost of renewable energy more than the cost of fossil fuels. The cheapest forms of energy we have available to us now are from the wind and the sun. And Rees, I don't know if you're aware, but we spend £16 billion a year subsidising the fossil fuel industry. That's £500 per household.
But that's nonsense. Where does that subsidy come from? Explain that subsidy.
This is a report by the IMF. Last year, the UK spent £16 billion subsidising fossil fuels.
There are no subsidies for fossil fuels. This is simply untrue. This is an argument made by the Green lobby with no evidence for it.
I'm talking about the IMF. Is that a Green lobby?
Well, the IMF gets lots of things wrong. Its forecasts of the UK economy have been consistently wrong. But tell me where these subsidies are.
Well, I haven't read the
only
report
ones people have ever mentioned.
I read the conclusion.
You read the conclusion. Well, why don't you read the full document, come back on and tell me where these subsidies are, because no one who's come on has been able to point to these subsidies for fossil fuels.
I'm pointing to one
no,
right
tax
now.
breaks are not subsidies. The two are completely different. Any business that buys capital assets is allowed to write that asset off against tax because it is a cost of doing business. You're saying companies should be taxed on their cost of doing business in a way no other business is. That's not a subsidy.
I'm talking about tax relief over and above the normal write-downs that businesses can apply.
They don't get beyond the 100% write-offs that ordinary businesses get. They get 100% write-off of investment in assets.
Rosebank in the North Sea, Rishi Sunak gave them £3 billion of our money to a Norwegian energy company, and the oil that it makes will never even land here.
The money they get through tax is for dismantling assets that have a high cost, and that they can offset against their tax bill. But that's true of all businesses. There is no subsidy for fossil fuels in this country, which are enormously heavily taxed. If you fill up your car with petrol, you will see how heavily taxed fossil fuels are. There is the windfall tax on energy companies. It's just not true to say they are subsidised, and you know that. You're far too clever to be making these things up.
You missed what I said about Rosebank.
Rosebank is a new investment. It hasn't got government money to do it. It will be a commercial opportunity.
That's not true. It's £3 billion of government money given to a Norwegian energy company. Do you not know
this is being done on a commercial basis. Rosebank is a commercial opportunity, and the gas will generate profit and tax for the country. And you've also let's come back also to your point on the technology not being there, because that's not what Claire said. Claire said the idea that there was no better technology to be developed was false, and surely that's true.
I was responding to what you said, Rees, at the start of it. When you spoke to me, you said that's what she said, the technology wasn't here yet.
She said in her speech, have you read her speech?
I've read news reports of it.
OK, so you haven't read her speech, which you said was light on detail. So it's pretty pointless doing an interview on it if you haven't bothered to read it.
Everything
isn't
you
it?
said, I've read. Everything you said, I read, and I say that's light on detail. That's just rhetoric.
But actually, I was referring to a speech which you couldn't be bothered to read.
I read about it in the news, and you repeated everything that I've read about it.
There's no point in not bothering to do your homework before coming on. Thank you, Dale.